The church, and I don't care what church you're talking about, the church has been co-opted by the world. Simply and purely. It's been co-opted in ways that we do not even begin to understand. The dynamics of what's going on in the world, the educational system, the political system, the society around us, what is happening to our children in school, what is happening to our children in movies, with television, the incredible amount of information that flows at us from every source all the time, then we need to understand that the church, per se, in the world, has been co-opted by the world. And we'd better begin to understand this before it's too late. Because for many people, it is already way too late. The world we live in today is an incredibly confusing place. The moral issues that keep rolling our way every day are sometimes almost overpowering. And all of the world's intellectuals, all of the best thinkers, the highest minds, the strongest political figures, the universities, the Congress, the medical profession, everyone from science to medicine, everything else is advancing the frontiers of knowledge so fast that it's almost impossible for a person to know immediately right from wrong in the numbers of questions that come rolling at us all the time. I was struck yesterday as I was browsing through. I get a great deal of my news on the internet, and I popped up on MSNBC.com and I found an article about a cure for Parkinson's disease. And it really looks like they are on the ragged edge right now, and just all they have to do is step over it, to where they will have a locked-in, sure enough, real cure for Parkinson's disease. What's the downside? The downside is it requires stem cells from human embryos. And this is where the confusion begins to set in. What is right? What is wrong? It's all tied up with the abortion issue, the right to life questions, the woman's right to choose questions, and of course is an embryo which can be created with the sperm from a man in Europe and a woman from an egg from a woman in Asia who never met each other, never knew each other, can be combined to create an embryo, and from that embryo can be taken stem cells which can actually cure Parkinson's disease, among other things, because they suggest that there may be other things out there ahead of us for that. It's probably going to happen very soon in England. It's probably going to happen very quickly in Europe. It will happen a little slower here in this country because of the moral issues involved with the taking of human life, with whether or not an embryo is human life, and all the struggles that go along with it. And if you're not confused at all by what's going on around you, it's probably because you're not paying attention. Because the issues, as I said, are powerful, they are strong, and the advocates for them are very strong as well. They have very strong business interests involved in the thing, because these stem cells and human embryos and so forth are used in other ways other than pure science and the healing arts. They're also used for cosmetics. And so it goes with many of the things that are happening. The question is, what are we going to do about some of these issues that lie before us? One of the responses, one of the most common responses of the human mind to confusion is apathy. And apathy are us. Apathy has crept up on the church. As again, I don't care what church you're talking about. Put any appellation before the word or behind the word you wish. Apathy has crept up on the church, and the church doesn't even know where it is these days. There was an interesting article, I think it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan published something about defining deviancy down. How that as time has gone by in our society, we have defined what is actually deviant behavior down to the level to where deviant behavior becomes normal. Then along comes Charles Krauthammer and writes an editorial on defining deviancy up. And what he's talking about this is that once you have defined deviancy down to a certain level, you begin to define what used to be normal behavior as deviant behavior. The whole change that is taking place in our society right now is calculated, and I have no doubt whatsoever at a spiritual level it is calculated, to confuse the questions of right and wrong to where people no longer know. And because of the confusion that sets in, Apathy follows on the heels of it, and people just decide to opt out and not pay any attention to it anymore. At the same time, and I don't think I had really quite gotten my mind around this until really in the last week, there are two what seem to be very opposite poles of thought in this country, politically speaking, that actually come from a similar, at their root they are the same. The one is libertarianism, and the other is liberalism, which, the libertarians are the people out there who believe whatever you want to do is up to you, and the liberals are on the other side, and the government has the answer to everything. And I still haven't really digested this completely, but one writer I was reading this past week was noticing that both of these have one thing very much in common, is they focus on a kind of what he called radical individualism. That both of them are dealing with the fact that I do this, it doesn't hurt anybody else, it's none of your business. The liberal side of the point of view of the things also, though, is concerned more with the questions of the individual and individualism in ways that I really had not entirely considered. But as I thought about it, I began to realize that one of the things that has happened and is happening in churches is the rise of what I would call radical individualism and a complete loss, in many cases, of any sense of community. Last year at the feast, I talked about this in a sermon called The Church That Stayed. If you haven't had it, drop me a line and get it. In that church, I referred to people who were not unwilling to make a commitment to a local church to attend somewhere as spiritual gypsies, spiritual nomads, this type of thing. Really offended quite a few people by what I had to say in that. Unfortunately, they were offended not because they heard the sermon, but because they read an article that summarized the sermon and therefore missed a number of things that I said in the sermon. But my point was my term, spiritual gypsies and nomads, was taken from the people who do this, who wander about from church to church to church to church and never settle down anywhere. That's how they describe themselves, which is why I took that term. But as for those who are offended by it, all I have to say at the moment is hard cheese. Because the fact is, we have given in to the world. We have accepted this idea of man alone, the rugged individualist who can stand off out here by himself and doesn't need anybody. And I think we have to come to understand that it's completely antithetical to the Bible. Now, what in the world are we to do about the apathy, about the problem of the fact that we have been co-opted by the world, about the confusion that lies around us? What are we to do with this? Well, I think most of us would know immediately that one of the things that's required of us is a thoroughgoing knowledge of the Bible and a daily acquaintance with the Bible, a daily study and meditation on the Scriptures, that the law of God is a perfect law, that it lights the way before us, it restores the soul, it helps us to understand life and helps us to make sense of the things that are going on around us. And oftentimes, the world has even conspired to get us confused about the Bible. Because what we have tended to do in some cases is whenever we read through the Bible, we find a number of places in the Bible where we find what I would call a bright line, where morals and conduct are concerned. A clear, distinct, bright line. Our problem is, oftentimes we go way beyond those bright lines and establish new, not so bright lines that we begin to struggle over and fight with and so forth. Now, I will come back to my earlier illustration. Where would you go in the Bible to try to show someone that using stem cells from a human embryo is somehow contrary to God's law or God's principles? There would be no bright line that you could find. Now, I will tell you quickly, I am very uncomfortable with the idea. But at the same time, all I can do is say I'm uncomfortable with the idea. Having read the Bible, having studied God's Word for all these many years, there's a feeling that I have that there's something wrong somewhere. However, to go to the wall on that issue, to pretend that that is a bright line, is dishonest. We have got to be painfully honest about where the bright lines are and where the vague lines are, where the general impressions are, where the personal convictions are, so that we don't get confused about what's right and what's wrong. Because a great deal of confusion has come about from trying to take things in the Bible that are not clear, from which you and I may derive guides to our life, and we call them bright lines, when in fact they're not. And this is where a great deal of confusion comes from as well. Because in fact the bright lines in the Bible are simple, they're clear, they're not hard to find, and surprisingly, they're not all that hard to follow. But they have gotten lost. The water has been muddied. Smoke and dust has been thrown in the air. And as a consequence, God's people find themselves confused. And one of the results, the first results of confusion, is apathy. Drop out, don't do anything, don't worry about it, let it all go. That's what we tend to have happen to us. Now today's sermon, I want to take you to two scriptures in the book of Numbers, 2 chapters. And I want to talk about circumstances that really boil down to the cure for apathy, which in the end is action. There isn't any metaphysical cure for it. There isn't any esoteric answer to it. There isn't something, some secret thing. The cure for apathy is getting out of your recliner, leaving the clicker for your television and the chair by it, taking off and getting out of there and doing something. This is where the difference comes. But there are two fundamental principles involved in this that I want to illustrate with two incidents out of the book of Numbers. The first is in the 16th chapter. Now the situation has developed as Israel find themselves on the road and in the wilderness, that politics begins to enter the picture. Now, politics is a very ugly word, but it's a word you need to get you need to get used to, and you need to understand that any time a group of people are together doing anything together, politics is there. And you ignore it to your peril. And you ignore it to the peril of the church. You ignore it to the peril of the work that God has for us to do together. You had better pay attention to politics or it will bite you. Here they are on the road. Now, these are people who have seen the pillar of fire. These are people who have seen the column of smoke. These are people who walk dry-shod across the Red Sea, and they are already arguing about who is in charge. That's the issue. And again, my point in this case is not going to be so much the authority or who's in charge question, because there is, in my opinion, a much larger issue that has to be addressed here. Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliah, and On, the son of Pelath, sons of Reuben, took men. And they rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the congregation, famous in the congregation, men of renown. These are important people, people who were known up and down one end of Israel, all very important men. They gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you lift yourselves up above the congregation of the Lord?" Looking back through all these thousands of years at this event, you just shake your head. What would it have taken for these men to understand that God sent Moses down into Egypt to get them out of there? That God spoke to Moses, he hadn't spoken to them. That God had chosen Aaron and placed him in there. That God did this. It wasn't Moses that did it. This wasn't nepotism. This was God's work. Well, they didn't get it. And as far as they were concerned, day in and day out, they thought that they were just as good as Moses. And Moses probably would have agreed with them. That wasn't the point as to who was as good as who. When Moses heard it, he fell on his face because he knew what the stakes were. And he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, "Tomorrow the Lord will show who are his and who is holy. He will cause him to come near to him, even him whom he has chosen, he'll cause to come near to him. I want you to do this. We're going to let God choose this. I'm not going to argue with you about this. Get all your men together in your company. Get your censers. Put fire in them. Put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord does choose, he shall be holy. You take too much upon yourselves, you sons of Levi." And Moses said to Korah, "Listen, I pray you, you sons of Levi. Does it seem a small thing to you?" It just wasn't enough for you, was it? That God chose you and separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself to do the service of the tabernacle of the congregation and to minister to them. He has brought you near to him and all your brethren, the sons of Levi, with you. And now what you got, that wasn't enough for you. Now you are seeking the priesthood also. You got to have what Aaron has got. For which cause both you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that you murmur against him? You know, I gather that Aaron was not a very prepossessing person. The fellow, well, who played him in the Ten Commandments? I can see him. I can't call his name right now. But he was not a very prepossessing person. And I don't think Aaron was. He was a better speaker than Moses, but he just says, who's Aaron? What are you so mad at Aaron for? And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Elah, and they said, we're not coming up there. He wanted them to come up and talk. They wouldn't come. And is it a small thing that you brought us up out of a land that flows with milk and honey, Egypt? You know, it's incredible. You remember what these people were in Egypt? They were slaves. Do you know what time they went to work in the morning? As soon as they could see. Do you know what time they knocked off for work in the evening? As soon as they couldn't see. Do you know how many days they took off on a weekend? None. He says, you brought us out here to kill us in the wilderness, and now you're going to make yourself a prince over us. Do you, moreover, you have not brought us to a land that flows with milk and honey, or given us an inheritance of fields or vineyards. Will you then put out the eyes of these men? We're not coming up there. Well, Moses, by this time, is really angry. Raw is the word. And said to the Lord, don't respect their offering. I haven't taken one ass from these men. I can see Moses wandering around kicking dust and talking to them, muttering under his breath. I haven't done anything to these men. I haven't taken so much as an ass from them. Moses said to Korah, be you and all your company before the Lord, you and they and Aaron tomorrow. Take every man his censer and get yourself ready. Finally, they came up there. Verse 21, he says, separate yourselves from among this congregation. Our God speaking now. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, get away from this congregation. Now, he's talking now about everybody. Just get out of here. Go somewhere else so I can consume them in a moment. They fell upon their faces and said, O Lord God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and you're going to be angry with the whole congregation? Well, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, tell the congregation then, get away from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Get away from their tents. Get as far away from them as you can. And Moses rose up, went to Dathan and Abiram, and all the elders of Israel followed him. And he spoke to the congregation, saying, get away from the tents of these evil men. Don't touch anything of theirs, lest you be consumed in all their sins. And, amazingly, the people got up and got away from them. Most of them did. From Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, every side, they began to move away. And these men came out and stood at the door of their tents, and their wives, and their sons, and their little children. Sobering thing to consider. And Moses said, hereby you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own hand. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited with the visitation of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. They get old and die, there's nothing like that. God didn't send me. I have nothing to do with it. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth will open up her mouth and swallow them up with all that appertain to them, and they go down to the pit, you're going to then understand that these men have provoked the Lord. Now, I don't know what it takes, folks, to make a point. But Moses makes it clear. These men have provoked, not me, they have provoked the Lord. It came to pass, as he had made an end of speaking all these words, the ground split under them. The earth opened her mouth and swallowed them up in their houses and all the men that appertained to them and all their goods. And I guess all their little children that were in the tents with them. Kind of frightening, isn't it? The consequences of this kind of attitude and work. And all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed on them. They perished from among the congregation. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, we don't want to go down there as two. And there came out a fire from the Lord and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. Man, you know, just a sizzling fire comes rolling out of the tabernacle and consumed 250 men standing on their feet out there, and dropped all of their braziers, and all the brass stuff fell down in the ashes of the men that were left. They took those censers and beat them into brass plates to put on the altar of God, so that down through all generations people could look and tell the story to their children. See that brass plate? That was originally a censer of one of 250 men who rebelled against God. Here's what happened to them, and the story could be told. But on the morrow, verse 41, the congregation of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron, saying, you have killed the people of the Lord. You know, you really have to slap yourself upside the head and say, what? How in the world would they think Moses has done this? That he could do this kind of thing? Why is this lesson so hard to learn? But they didn't have it. Well, it came to pass when the congregation was gathered before Moses and against Aaron, they were up there muttering and telling them the story. You've killed the people of God. And all of a sudden they look over their shoulder and toward the tabernacle, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. I cannot imagine what that looked like. All of a sudden there's the huge cloud. Everybody turns and looks and points and oohs and ahs. There it is, probably with lightning unfolding in and out of it, which is the glory of God that they saw over there. And Moses and Aaron came before the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, and the Lord spoke to them, saying, get away from this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. You know what God is saying at this point in time to Moses and Aaron? Pick up your stuff, get out in the desert away from this bunch of people. I'm going to wipe them out. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not believe that God bluffs. I don't think God ever ran a bluff in all the history of man. That he was fully prepared at this moment of time, if Moses and Aaron had done that, to do it. Well, Moses said to Aaron, take a censer, put fire off the altar, and put on incense, and run quickly into the congregation and make an atonement for them. For there is wrath gone out from the Lord, the plague has begun. What had happened at the moment God spoke was somewhere out here on this side of the camp, people started dropping down sick and dying. The plague started and began moving through the camp. One rank, one row, one tent at a time, as people began to die off out there on the reaches. Moses said, you'd better move quickly because the plague has started. I don't know how he knew that, but he knew it. Aaron took, as Moses commanded, and ran into the midst of the congregation, and behold, the plague had begun among the people, and he put on incense, and he made atonement for the people, and he stood between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. And they that died in the plague were 14,700. Now here is the whole reason why I read you this whole story. Suppose Aaron had walked. Just walked. That he had moseyed over, got his censer, dumped some fire into it, popped a little incense on it, and then strolled out into the middle of the congregation. How many more people would have died? Think about that. Because this was happening very fast. 14,700 people finally died of this plague. And where Aaron stood between the people, he stood between the dead and the living. It must have been going, it must have been going through ranks by the minute. And if he had merely just strolled out there, walked out there, delayed out to go out there, whatever it was that he would have had to stop to do, so much as to blow his nose, more people would have died. Now, why do I read this? Because it's this. If the answer to our problem of apathy is action, one of the aspects of action that's crucial is immediacy. You do it now. You don't do it tomorrow. You don't do it next week. You don't do it lazily. You don't walk at it. There's a scripture that says, whatsoever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. If it's time to do something for God, do it well. Apply yourself to it. Apply yourself to it now. Do it diligently. Proceed quickly to the job at hand. This is one of the things that I think that has crept up on us because of our confusion or whatever else exists, and the apathy that begins to creep over us. We think we have all the time in the world. There is a passage there where Jesus talks about the time, if no man knows the day or the hour when the Son of Man will come, in Matthew 24. And he talks about how it's easy to say, my Lord delays his coming, and to begin to eat and to drink with the drunken, and to smite your fellow servants, behave badly toward one another. It is so easy to let down those bars. But here is a classic. And the reason I cite it for you is because it is revelatory of God, not Aaron. That what Aaron did made a difference in the lives of people. He doesn't go out there. He and Moses pack their bags and leave, and the whole gang of them is dead. Right? What Aaron did made a difference, and the speed with which he did it made a difference. He ran out there as fast as he could to stand between the dead and the living, because the thing was coming through the camp like a wave. What is your challenge? What's out there that you're planning on getting to sometime? What is it that you know you really ought to do, that one of these days you're thinking, well, when I get around to it, I will do it. Whenever I get a chance, I'll do it. When I have more time, I will do it. Well, what's at stake? Sometimes things are at stake that we don't even know about. Now I want you to turn back a few more chapters to Numbers 25. Numbers 25. It's a little shorter chapter than the last one, and a very, very poignant lesson at that. Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. All right. They come into the area, they're camping out in Moab, and there's some good-looking women there. So they decide they'd fool around a little bit. And one thing leads to another, and God finally says, well, they were committing whoredom with them. And they called the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods, and Israel joined himself to Baal Peor, and the anger of God was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away from Israel. Go out there and hang them. Just take all of them, all the leaders, and just hang them up in a row so everybody can see what's happening here and turn away from what's going on. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, slay you every one, his men that were joined to Baal Peor. What happened? Nothing. They didn't do it. Read the context. It's just what goes on. He says, behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses, in the sight of the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Why were they weeping? Because people were dying already. The plague had begun once again. And here we have a situation where Moses, God told Moses, we're going to have some discipline here. You take the leaders who are tolerating this kind of behavior and you hang them up before the people so they can see that this is not to be done. Nothing has been done. Moses said, do this. He gave instructions to his people to do it, and apparently no one had moved yet. And this man comes waltzing right by in front of Moses with a Midianitish woman, takes her straight into his tent, just in your face, Moses. Right in the sight of everybody who was there. And I guess all of them just stood there and watched. And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the high priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation, and he took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel into the tent. He thrust both of them through. He just pinned both of them to the ground with one javelin thrust. This is the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. Tough love, isn't it? Tough stuff. But there comes a place when action is called for, and there is no substitute for action. And in this case, the action is not only immediate, it's direct. I don't know how much more direct you get than a javelin thrust through two people. Those that died in the plague this time, 24,000. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, has turned away my wrath from the children of Israel while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Wherefore say, behold, I will give to him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood. The lessons that fall out in these two things, I can't help but recall Paul's words when he says, behold the goodness and the severity of God. And I fear that in the modern world, the severity of God disappears somewhere. It gets lost in the smoke and the haze and the confusion, and people forget that God cares what goes on in this world. that He cares what happens in our community. He cares whether we tolerate it or not, or whether we put up with it. He cares whether we sigh and cry like Job for all the abominations that are done among us. He cares how we look at these things. It's easy to forget. And you need to go back from time to time to these times, which were unusual times in history. They were severe times, dangerous times for Israel, times when the whole thing could have been lost. And because of the direct, immediate action of one man, a plague was stayed and people lived, and history was different. Because what one man did made a difference. Now the name of the Israelite that was slain, verse 14, even that was slain with the Midianite woman, was Zimri the son of Salu, a prince of the chief house of the Simeonites. His father was a chief man. He was like today a senator in the United States Senate. It was the son of a senator that was doing this type of thing, which is why he was getting away with it. Think about it. His father was in a position of power, and everybody was willing to wink. Everybody was willing to ignore what was going on. It was the most important people who were doing it, and no one would say anything. No one would lift their tongue up against him. No one would condemn it. But one man did. He went in and pinned the son of a senator to the floor in his tent. And the name of the Midianitish woman that was slain was Cosbi, the daughter of Zur. He was head over a people and of the chief house in Midian. Politics. Politics. Simple, old, party, dirty politics lay at the root of this, what was going on here. And as I said earlier, anytime you get a group of people together, politics comes among us as well. And if we don't pay attention to it, it will eat our lunch. We have to pay attention to it. We have to deal with politics. We have to be political ourselves in a correct and proper way. And it requires honesty. It requires courage. It requires telling the truth at all times and not covering up for people because they're powerful. Not pretending things didn't happen because it will hurt somebody's feelings or because it may cause you a little trouble somewhere down the line. Somewhere, somehow, somebody has got to stand up for what's right, or wrong will take over completely. And God may send a plague. He may scatter His people. Who knows what kind of things God may ultimately do. But there are bitter and hard lessons in the Bible that have been learned by other people that we will and can, if we just will pay a little more careful attention, could perhaps save ourselves and perhaps save some other people as well. There are things in the world around us that are right, and there are things that are wrong. And the one thing that I think that we in the Church of God and other churches are called upon to do is to stand up for what is right and to stand against what is wrong with immediacy, with diligence, and directly. Because if we stand around and have nothing to say, if we don't prepare ourselves with the arguments that are needed, if we don't know what we're talking about when we say whether we agree or we disagree with public policy, our voice will never be heard. But I feel that if God's people will somehow find a way to express themselves in the world, will somehow find a way to stand up for what is right, if you believe that abortion is wrong, if you believe that the taking of the life of an unborn child in the 8th month, when he's fully formed, when he's got fingers and toes and fingernails and all the things, that really make a real child, if you feel that it's really wrong, if you've ever seen one of these films where the doctor is actually doing one of these things, and you actually see him reach inside with a forceps and actually watch the process of him cracking the baby's skull and pulling it out of the womb, if you feel that's wrong, you really should figure out or find out for yourself the way to tell people that it's wrong, the way to make the case, the way to explain the problem. And it involves work on your part. It involves education on your part. And it means that when you're talking to people who think that that's not important, that that's not a real human life, that you're in a position to tell them, yes, it is. And tell them why, if that's what you believe. And if you believe, on the other hand, that a woman should have the right to choose to kill that baby all the way up to the time that's finally partial, you'd better be prepared to demonstrate it. You'd better be prepared to open the Bible and explain it. You'd better be prepared to explain it morally, ethically, philosophically. You need to stand for what you believe and not merely just drift along with some kind of vague idea, some terminology that you've heard somewhere that suggests, well, maybe this is all right. If you're one of those people, and I have no idea of any such thing exists here, so I'm not picking on anybody who is here that I know of. But if you're one of these people that don't feel that marriage is critical for sleeping with another person, who feels like you can kind of move on in together and try this out for a period of time, you really had better be prepared to explain before God and man from the Bible why that's okay. And frankly, I think we as a church need to remember what Paul said, that if any man who is called a brother is a fornicator, that we should not even so much as eat with that person. That the idea of people who are shacked up, if they come to us as visitors in the church, we should make them welcome and not discriminate in that way. But if that person is called a brother, that's not right. And that we should deal with immediacy and with directness. Because I don't believe that God will look kindly upon us as a church if we tolerate people in our midst who are known, active fornicators. I just don't believe He'll stand for it. Now, what are we going to do? Can we behold the goodness and the severity of God? You know, there is a passage of Scripture that is so familiar to you, I don't think you'll need to turn to it. I won't even turn to it. Matthew 5 and verse 13. Where Jesus, after He's gone through the Beatitudes, blessed are the meek, blessed are the poor in spirit, makes His way on down to that. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And the thing that struck me when I looked at that, I thought, that doesn't say that you're the light of the church. It doesn't say you're the salt of the church. It says you are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Now, why is that important? Well, Jesus went on to say, if you got a candle, you don't stick it under a bush or stick it over here in the corner somewhere. You put it up on a stand so it can give light to the house. What is this talking about? When you go back to Psalm 119, you find a very clear statement about the nature of the law, what it is and what it's for. Your law is a lamp unto my feet and a light to my path. The purpose of the law is to keep you from falling down and hurting yourself. And those of us who know the law of God, who are in this world, and who live according to the law of God, are a light to the people around us so that they don't fall and hurt themselves. And if they do, it will not be because there was no one setting an example. There was no one standing there who was willing to stand up for what is right. There was no one there who was willing to stand up against what is wrong. They will know, even if they condemn you, they will know. For people oftentimes do not want light and won't come to the light, as John put it, because their deeds are evil. That's their problem. But what if you were supposed to be the light and you were not? Every moment of every day, wherever you are, whether you're in Walmart, whether you're in a restaurant having dinner, no matter where you are and no matter who you are with, you are the salt of the earth and you're the light of the world, and God depends on you to set an example and to show the way for people. It's not altogether, evangelism is not altogether a matter of walking up to some guy sitting on a parched beach, sitting down next to the guy on the bench and saying, you know the Lord, brother? It really isn't that. What it really is talking to the people you know. It's dealing with the people you work with. It's seeing someone you are working with making a mistake that's going to hurt him in the rest of his life and just asking him, Bob, are you sure you want to do that? Just that much. Bob, I would sure hate to see you do that. Bob, I would really hate to see you go down that road. Susan, do you have any idea how much hurt you're letting yourself in for? Sometimes it will go no further than that. Sometimes the person will not receive it. But often as not, they will say, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. Well, what are you talking about? And from there forward, you've got to depend on the Spirit of God and your knowledge of the Word of God to allow you to open up yourself to that person, to help them understand that there is a difference between right and wrong conduct, and to blow away some of the smoke to brush out some of the fog and the dust so that the person can see that there is a right way and there's a wrong way, and the wrong way hurts big time and hurts bad. You are the salt of the earth. There's another scripture in 1 John 2 and verse 14 where John says, "My brethren, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. For the lusts that are in the world, the lust of things and the pride of possessions and all these things are not of God. These things are of the world." And you've got to understand that, in a way, you read this and you say, it says, "Love not the world," and you think in terms of, well, I shouldn't love my Chevy, and I shouldn't love my minivan, or I shouldn't love my house, and I don't set my heart on the things of the world. The world, boys and girls, is much more than that. The world is much more than that. The world is that entity which has already co-opted the church, which has already taken the issues away from us, which is so far out ahead of us on the moral issues of our time, is so far out ahead of us on capturing the hearts and minds of our children, and we are so far behind that it may already be too late. But with God, it's never too late to make a start. Turn back finally to Revelation 3. Have to go there. Can't possibly finish this sermon without a reference to Revelation 3 in verse 14. "To the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, These things saith the Amen, the faithful and the true witness, the beginner of the creation of God. I know your works. You're neither cold nor hot. You have been co-opted by the world. I wish you were cold or hot, but because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I'm going to spit you out. Because you say, I am rich and increased with goods, I don't have any need of anything, I'm doing just fine. And you don't know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked." And there's only one way to take that, folks. He's not talking about your cars or your house or your fur coats. He's talking about the spirit. You think spiritually you're just fine, but you are apathetic, lukewarm, you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked and don't even know it. And that is where the world has left us. It's where we are. Poor, miserable, blind, naked, and we don't even know it. I remember, it hasn't been that long ago, at least doesn't seem like it to me, when a movie came out and Clark Gable was talking to this woman on the stairs, and she says, "What's going to become of me?" He says, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." And the whole world was scandalized by the word damn. And now we are scandalized by nothing. Nothing. I mean, we got X-rated movies out there and all that, and R-rated movies, but scandalized by them? Not really. Not really. And the language, well, I mean, I haven't heard any new words, but the only place I heard them back when was when I was in the Navy, was in the locker room or, at the barracks or someplace like that. Nowadays, what you would normally call polite conversation isn't very polite. God says, "I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire," which suggests to me that the way out of the situation we have already found ourselves into is not going to be easy. "Buy gold tried in the fire that you may be rich, and white raiment that you may be clothed, and the shame of your nakedness do not appear. And anoint your eyes with eye salve, so you can see. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent. Behold, I stand at the door and knock." The way back is not a long way. I'm standing right here at the door knocking. Just open the door and I'll come in and sup with him and he with me. And then he says this marvelous zinger that comes into here, that comes in 7 times in these 2 chapters in the book of Revelation, and which actually formed the basis for the title of my radio program, Born to Win. "To him that overcomes will I grant to sit with me in my throne, even as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne." Overcome is 3 syllables for winning. For winning. "To him that wins, I'll grant to sit with me on my throne because I won." And you are supposed to win as well. A friend of mine recently was going through a really tough time in his life, heading for divorce, but there was a lot more behind it than that. He said, I don't know if I will ever get over this. I wrote back to him and said, no, you won't ever get over it, but you may overcome it. And this is the challenge that is before us today and at every step of the turn. You are not going to get over this, and you're not going to get through this without problems, but you may overcome it. But you're not going to overcome it unless you act with immediacy and with directness. God help us all.